Hello, everybody. My name is Zach Lillo. I work for LOV Inclusively. We are a advocacy and community-based group for individuals with developmental disabilities. We focus on community building. Right now, that's a little bit difficult with the coronavirus, so we're focusing on keeping everybody connected through other means such as online connection. And one of those ways that we're doing that is through interviews with experts in certain areas. And we are meeting with one today. His name is Lynn Breedlove. Lynn is going to talk to us about how he's knows a lot about advocacy and policy building in Wisconsin, especially among developmental disability work. And he's going to talk about how this coronavirus can affect a lot of individuals policy-wise and just ways to stay safe at this time. Lynn, could you introduce yourself to the people?
Yeah, hi, Zach. I'm sitting here right on the shore of Lake Superior in Bayfield County. So I'm in a pretty comfortable spot to talk to you. I was the executive director of Disability Rights Wisconsin for a long time, from 1980 to 2011. Since then, I've been doing training and writing and speaking, a lot of it around self-direction. One thing I've also done is I've been a co-facilitator for the Partners in Policy Making training, which has been going on now for 8 years. For those of you who are in the IRIS program, you might be interested to know that I was one of the people that was involved in the original design of IRIS and the creation of it a few years back. So that's probably enough about me.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for introducing yourself. Let's get this ride underway. So, Lynn, what would you say are the immediate political consequences caused by the Safer at Home Act?
Well, the first thing I would say is I think Governor Evers made a good decision by announcing the Safer at Home order. Not every state in the United States has done that, and I think the states who have not done it, there's some danger that more people are going to get this virus. So I'm really glad Wisconsin is one of the states that's doing it. And I would say to the people who are listening that if you stay at home and you do the cautious things that have been suggested, like don't get close to other people, wash your hands, your chances of getting this virus are very, very low. So I think that's the good news. Obviously some of you have personal care workers who are going to have to get close to you, and I'm sure they have made sure that they don't have the virus, so that's safe. But I think except for that, you really ought to try to stay 6 feet away from other people as much as you can. But, if you think there's no chance you're going to get the virus because you don't know anyone who has it and you don't think it's likely you're going to get it, you should know that there are some people in the IRIS program in Wisconsin who have tested positive for the virus. So it's real and it's out there. And if you're not cautious, there is always a chance you could get it. As far as the political consequences, I think that after the Safer at Home order has been in place for a while, there is going to be pressure on the governor and the legislature to reopen restaurants, reopen businesses, movie theaters, coffee shops. And that's going to take a political form, because some of those owners of those businesses are going to be calling legislators and saying, hey, we've been closed quite a while. We can't take it anymore. Could you please give us a chance to start doing business? I think one other consequence is that there's really a big concern that people are not going to vote next week. And we're going to talk about voting later, but that is certainly a danger. If not many people vote, then that means a very small number of people are going to decide those elections. One good thing I think that could happen is there's some signs that there might be more cooperation between Democrats and Republicans, because they share a concern about this emergency and they want to do the right thing for the people of Wisconsin. And for example, I heard a couple days ago that Democrats and Republicans agree that there should not be a waiting period to get unemployment compensation. And that's obviously an important thing for people who can't go to work right now. And hopefully there'll be some other examples of things that both parties will do together.
Perfect. Yeah. I mean, it's hopefully something that becomes not a political issue, and it can help build partisanship between both major parties. You mentioned before about how a lot of states are focused on the safer at home order. Do you think that there's a chance that there might be a federal safer at home order there where it's just a blanket statement?
A lot of people are encouraging the president to do that. And he does have the authority to do it. He could declare a state of emergency for the entire United States, and then he would have the power to do that. So far, he's resisted it. And what he said is, well, some states like New York have a big problem. Some other states like South Dakota don't have such a big problem. So we really shouldn't force all the states to do this. But what some of the experts are saying is the states that don't have a big problem now may have a big problem a month from now. And the smart thing would be to have a safer at home order in those states now and prevent that problem. But so far, the president hasn't been convinced.
It's a shame. Hopefully something finally goes through eventually. Speaking more towards our audience, what would you say are some of the big impacts of these orders for individuals with disabilities? You talked about obviously not being able to receive the services they normally could, but could you expand on that?
Well, obviously, some people who do have jobs can't go to their jobs right now. There's a lot of jobs that have shut down during this crisis, which is obviously a big disappointment for people in terms of what do you do with your time in the day. A lot of people really like their jobs. They enjoy going there. That means they can't do that right now. Some of their friends are at work. They can't see those people. And obviously they're not getting their paycheck. So that's a disappointment. I think obviously some people can't do some of the stuff out in the community that they like to do. Some people may like to go to the library or go to the movies or go out for coffee or go have a beer. And those places that they like to go are all closed right now. So that can be isolating for people. I think it's important that people with disabilities realize that your caregivers have to be very careful now, and some of you have workers coming into your apartments or your house to assist you, and they have to try very hard to make sure they don't get this virus, because if they got it from one person, then they might give it to another person. So they're taking precautions. They may try to do some things over the phone that normally they do by visiting your apartment. And I think it's just important to be understanding that there's a good reason for that, because you don't want those caregivers to get you sick either. Those are a few examples, I guess.
No, it's tough for everybody. As somebody who focuses on community-based employment for people I work with, I mean, this is about as limiting as you can possibly get, but we're all trying to adapt and try and figure out what this time in America is.
Yep.
Moving on, a big thing that's coming up in everybody's mind is the stimulus bill. And I was wondering if you could just talk about the upcoming bill and how payments will work for everybody, especially with individuals with disabilities.
Yeah, my understanding is that every adult is going to get a $1,200 payment. And it's supposed to happen by the end of April. Now, that's what the government is saying, and sometimes they say the end of April, and it turns out that it's really, the middle of May. So when they say end of April, I would sort of take that with a grain of salt, but hopefully it means no longer than the middle of May. Originally, it looked like the only people that were going to get the payment were people who had actually filed an income tax return for 2019. But as of yesterday, the federal government changed that and said, and they got a lot of pushback when they said that. So they changed their position. And yesterday they said, not only will people who filed a tax return get this payment, but other people will get the payment as well. And for example, people that are on SSI or SSDI who are not employed and maybe did not file taxes. The government has a record of who you are, because if you're in the Social Security system, they know who you are, and they are now saying that you will also get a check. So that's really good news.
Good. One thing a lot of people are worried about is this potentially affecting their SSI or SSDI payments, because for a lot of people, you only can have a certain amount of wealth at a time.
Yes.
Before,
Yep.
is that something that's been addressed that member or that
Yep.
individuals shouldn't have to worry about?
That's absolutely not going to be a problem. I spoke to someone this morning who's an expert on disability benefits, and what she told me is that this special payment, the special one-time payment, is not earned income. It's not the same as your paycheck for your job, and it will not be counted towards your income limits for SSI or SSDI. So people do not have to worry. You're going to get this $1,200, and you're going to get exactly the same size SSI check or SSDI check as you got before.
That's definitely a relief to hear. I'm hearing a lot of people just refer to it as just another tax return instead of it being like an income boost, which I think that should help hopefully clarify what exactly people are getting.
Yep.
So obviously, we're coming up to the spring primaries, and a big deal with voting, but obviously we're being told to stay at home as much as we can. I actually just switched to absentee voting for the first time ever. I just mailed my ballot a couple days ago.
Right.
Could you explain to everybody some ways to safely vote? I mean, there's also polling stations are being
Yep.
being limited, and just other options they can to vote instead.
Okay, it's getting a little late for absentee voting now, and I've talked to some people who requested their absentee ballot in the last 3 or 4 days or in the last week, and they haven't gotten it yet, which is not surprising because there's more people requesting absentee ballots this year than ever before. So the election officials are behind, and it's possible that some people will not get their absentee ballots until after Election Day. Now, hopefully those ballots will still get counted, but you can see it's a little bit fuzzy. I actually think that if people want to vote at their polling place, there will be rules there which will prevent people being in close contact with each other. I think they are going to ensure that there's social distance, and that may mean people waiting a little longer in line to get into the polling place. But since a lot of people have already done absentee voting, I think the actual number of people going to the polling place is going to be smaller than it usually is. So I don't think the waiting time is going to be that long. But I will say this, because a lot of the workers at the voting place are worried about working those days, a lot of them have called in and said they're not going to show up, which means that not all of the polling places in Madison are going to be open. So if you want to go to your polling place to vote, you should call the city clerk's office. And that number is 266-4601. And when you call that number, you'll hear a number of options. They'll say, oh, do you want to know more about absentee voting? Do you want to know where your polling place is? And if you pick that option, where your polling place is, they'll ask you what your address is. And if you tell them your address, they'll tell you where you should vote this year, which might be different than where you voted last year, because it could be that they've got 3 polling places in one part of town, and 2 of them are closed, and they're only using one of them. And the one that they're using might not be the one that you went to last year. So if you want to go to the polls, I would suggest you call and make sure you're going to the right place so you don't end up at a polling place that's closed. And also, you should know on Election Day, the polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Do you believe that that there will be an expansion to voting? I know that a lot of states are either pushing back their initial voting or election day, or they're just adding extra things. And I know that Evers has brought up things, but there's a lot of pushback in legislation. Do you think that'll happen in Wisconsin, where we might see April 7th pushed back?
There are some lawsuits that have been filed. Some groups are saying it's not safe now, or we shouldn't do it now, or we could wait another month. So there is some litigation around that, but the governor says he wants to go ahead with voting next week. And what he's saying is, people had the chance to vote absentee, and we're going to make our polling places safe. And he's actually going to have National Guard people there to fill in for some of the poll workers who aren't showing up. So he's encouraging people to go ahead with this. But, with lawsuits, it could be right up to the day before, somebody could decide in the courts that it's going to be delayed. But as of now, there's no decision to delay it.
Hopefully they figure out a way to keep pushing it, or allow other people to vote, because I feel like a lot of people might miss out on the opportunity to vote if they go to their polling place and there's just nobody there. So
yeah, I hear you.
This is a time, though. I feel like a lot of people vote, or if they don't vote, or even if they do vote, they might not be the most informed voter. So I myself included, I like to think I'm a very informed voter, but I'm using this time to better inform myself on all the different candidates, and I've been looking into it more than ever.
Right.
The issue is that so many people hear about media bias, and it's hard to really kind of figure out what's true and what's not true with politicians. I have a couple very websites that I use that I believe are unbiased and are very on the nose and trustworthy. But are there any places that you would go to get information on people you would vote for?
There's a website for the League of Women Voters of Dane County. And I believe the league is actually nonpartisan and objective. And if you go on their website, what you'll see is, for example, if you look at the two people running for the state Supreme Court, they ask them the same 6 or 7 questions, and they post on the website every word of the answers, with no editing, no comments, saying, oh, that's a good answer, that's a bad answer. They just put the answers out there for us to read, and we make our own determination whether we think those answers are good or not. If you look at who's on the ballot right now, it's mostly the 2 Supreme Court candidates. That's the only statewide race. But then there'll be elections for county board members. And so there's a number of people running for the county board, some who are already on the board and running again, some are new candidates. And the League of Women Voters does actually, they ask questions of all those candidates. So not all the candidates reply, but most of them do. So I think that's a fairly good source.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, I couldn't have you on without talking to you about upcoming policies, since that's your bread and butter. Are there any particular new bills coming up that are you think really important for individuals with disabilities to know about, and maybe use this as a time to advocate for themselves?
Well, this decision about the safer at home date, right now the governor has said we're going to have this in place until April 24th. I think if we get into the middle of April, and if some people are still not feeling comfortable about going back to work or going out in the community, and they feel like April 24th is too soon and it should be extended to May 1st or May 15th or whatever, that is definitely something that all of us, including people with disabilities, could, send an email to the governor's office and say, I think April 24th sounds great. Let's get back to work. Let's open up our communities. Or I'm not comfortable with that. I think that's too soon. I think you ought to extend it. The governor is certainly going to be listening not just to medical experts, he's going to be listening to the citizens of Wisconsin when he makes that decision. So I think that's going to be pretty important. The other thing is, the governor has proposed a big chunk of money to be spent by the state to help people in a variety of ways. And at this point, the leadership of the Republican Party have said, well, that bill goes too far. That's going to cost too much. I don't think we should do that. So there's going to be some debate between the legislature and the governor about, well, what are the most important things that people need right now? And, that bill has too many things in it for me to try to describe it right now. But I think that there's going to be disability advocacy groups that are going to be getting summaries out of those bills. And I think if you go on the website for the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities or Disability Rights Wisconsin or the Survival Coalition, you're going to see information about the governor's bill. And maybe, who knows, the Republicans may come up with their own bill. And if they do, I'm sure there'll be information about that bill. And there'll be stuff in there that will affect people with disabilities for sure. So, I think looking at those summaries when they become available, and if you have an opinion, contact your state legislator. Every legislator is going to have to be involved in this and place a vote on this. I think you should weigh in on that. Now, outside of the legislature, I think the other things, there's some policies right now that are specific to the IRIS program that the legislature probably won't vote on these, but these are the things that state government has decided. For example, it looks like the state is going to allow the use of what they call telehealth, which is, calling people or maybe using an iPad to assist people in certain ways without going into somebody's home. So, for example, if you have someone who's coming in and helping you prepare meals or is giving you living skills training in your apartment or in your home, it may be that same person will say, let's do this over the phone. Or if you have an iPad, let's do it that way. And I'll explain to you how to make a meatloaf without actually standing next to you in your kitchen. So that may be something that is going to be happening. Probably some of you already know that your IRIS consultants are not coming into your home. They're probably contacting you by phone or video. So those are examples of things that usually would be done face-to-face, but maybe for a while they're not going to be done that way.
Yeah, that's something that we're going through right now here at LOV Inc. And just like a lot of other organizations, do you feel like potentially the funding, though, source like that, where you're talking about telehealth, where after this whole crisis is over, that there's still, would you think that extra funding will end right away? Or do you think that there's a possibility that'll stay around where organizations can use that in a more expanded fashion than they weren't able to before?
I don't know. I mean, the other thing is, for somebody who's doing living skills training and they're being paid a certain amount to do it, if they do it remotely with an iPad, I don't know that they're going to get paid any more to do it that way than if they went into somebody's home. Now, the cost of actually buying things like iPads, that may end up being something that's in people's IRIS budgets. So, for example, if somebody said, hey, I need help in learning how to cook, and just telling me on the phone really isn't good enough. I have to actually see it. And the only way I can see it would be on an iPad, and I don't have an iPad. It might be that could be a budget amendment, and somebody could get that iPad in the IRIS program. And one of the things that the state has said is they're going to make it easier for people to change their IRIS plans and get budget amendments right now during this crisis than they usually do. So sometimes, you have to submit a written request and then you have to wait a month to find out. They're going to try to streamline that, make it easier, take away a lot of the red tape. So if people feel like, hey, because of this virus, like I really need to get my support in a different way than I did before, and that might require me to change my IRIS plan, that should be easier than it normally would be. And that would be something to talk to your IRIS consultant about.
That'd be good to know. Yeah, I mean, I could see. Do you think expansion to the IRIS program could be a real possibility because of this? Obviously, budget amendments, there's a possibility, but do you think this overall funding could increase because there just needs to be so many more specialized cares done now than before?
I don't know. I mean, I haven't heard anyone predicting that so far, but I think as this crisis unfolds, if what people in IRIS discover and if what IRIS consultants discover is, hey, we need more funding to do this right, to make sure people really get the support they need, I think the state is going to be willing to consider that. Because what I've been hearing is that since this crisis got serious, state government has been pretty flexible and pretty responsive and seems to be really committed to helping people stay safe, helping people get the support they need. So maybe that will happen, Zach. It's probably a little too early to say right now.
That's fair. We were talking about like advocating, and obviously there's a lot of different ways to advocate when there isn't a pandemic, but obviously right now we're really limited. And you named a way of calling your legislator, but what are some other ways that anyone can advocate for themselves at a time like this when it's really needed?
Yeah, I think one thing you should realize is just because there's this safer at home order in place, that doesn't mean that you should have to accept things like not being able to get the groceries you need, or not being able to get the medicine you need, or if you're sick, not being able to get health care. And I don't necessarily mean, sick with a coronavirus. I mean, if you're sick with something else, you have a skin rash or you sprain your ankle or whatever, you should be able to get the health care, the food, the medicine, the prescriptions. You should be able to get all of that. Now, you may not get it the same way you usually do. You might have to get some things delivered, or you might have to talk to one of the people that provide you services to ask them, well, what's the best way to get my prescription? But I really I encourage people not to settle for something less than you really need. And you should advocate for yourself. And that might mean calling your IRIS consultant, or if you're in family care, calling your care manager, or calling the agency that provides you services and say, hey, this isn't working for me right now. I didn't get the groceries this week I was supposed to get. So, I need some help here to get this straightened out. The other thing is, if you don't get your stimulus check, this $1,200 check by, the end of April or the middle of May, then I think you should start calling people. I could see calling your state legislator and saying, hey, I was told that the federal government was going to get these checks out by the end of April. Well, now it's May 10th or it's May 15th. I didn't get my check yet. What do I do? And, legislators, remember, they're not just voting on bills and making laws. They're actually supposed to assist their constituents when they have problems. And those could even be, little problems. Like you might think, well, one person not getting their $1,200 check, well, that's not a big problem. Well, yes, it is. It's a big problem for you. And the staff that work for the state legislators, a lot of the work they do is taking calls from individual people who have real life problems and helping them figure out, how to fix them. So that's a form of advocacy right there, is contacting your elected officials and saying, hey, I need some help.
How would someone figure out who their elect? Like a lot of people don't know who their state legislator or state senator is off the top of their head. What would be an easy way to find out that information?
Yeah, actually, there's I think there's an 800 number, which I don't have handy, but I'll see if I can find it while we're talking here. And all you do is you call in there and you give them your home address, and they tell you.
Okay, perfect. I mean,
so that works good. But before we finish, I'll see if I can find it.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, this one of the benefits I've been seeing because of the pandemic, which they're very few and far between. But I have noticed a lot of people are more willing to advocate for themselves and stand up for the things that before they might have been okay with, but now that they might not have the money they had before because of working, they're really realizing how much they should be advocating for themselves that they haven't. So hopefully that kind of builds a new pathway for people to fight for themselves.
That reminds me, Zach, too. So, some people who had a job and now that job is not available to them right now. Some of those people may qualify for unemployment compensation. And if you have a job coach, if you're working with a supported employment agency, I think you can call them and say, "Hey, can I get unemployment? And if so, how do I do that? And would you help me get it?" Because we've been talking about the $1,200 check, but the other thing is unemployment compensation may be available to some people.
Oh, it's something that's very helpful for everybody. And just in case people are wondering, that unemployment would that act like a form of income with SSI or SSDI, or would it work differently?
It would be income you'd get instead of your paycheck. And because it wouldn't be any larger than your paycheck, it wouldn't affect your SSI check any more than your current paycheck does, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So if your paycheck is fairly small and you're getting the full SSI payment, that will continue. If your paycheck is bigger and your SSI check already has been reduced because of the size of your paycheck, then maybe that will continue. But it won't make your SSI check any smaller than it is right now.
Perfect.
And I found the phone number I was looking for. If you call 266-9960, that's called the legislative hotline, and they can tell you what. If you tell them your address, they'll tell you who your legislator is. There's also a website that you can use to do it as well if you prefer to do that. But I think that phone number is probably a pretty handy way to do it.
Perfect. Thanks. Could you, so for a lot of people, speaking to their legislators can be seen as a little scary. And obviously you have a lot of experience speaking to a ton of different Wisconsin and federal representatives. Could you give some of our folks tips about how to prepare to talk to legislators?
Yeah, I know people get scared about it. And the thing to realize is, the legislators themselves, if you call their office, you're probably not going to end up talking to them. You're going to probably you may end up leaving a message because, of course, a lot of the staff are not going into Capitol right now, but they'll check the messages and they'll call you back. And basically, if you call in and say what your name is and where you live and say, I'm a constituent of Senator Miller, let's say if you're in Mark Miller's district, and I expected to get my stimulus check by now, and I didn't get it. So can you help me find out where it is and what's going on? It's just that easy. So it's basically the same way you would talk to Zach or your IRIS consultant or your care manager. Just state your problem and ask, can they help you? And you don't have to be an expert on any of this stuff. All you really need is to say is, I'm your constituent. I need some help. Can you help me? Yeah, it's really pretty easy.
I think that everybody gets the idea that all politicians are these big scary people up in the Capitol just trying to screw them or whatever. So it's helpful to hear that they're people just like us and they care about the people who vote for them. So it's just it's tough.
Yep.
It's good to hear that every now and then.
Yeah, and the thing is, remember, in Wisconsin, it's not like California, New York. Like our legislators, some of them are farmers when they're not in the Capitol. Some of them are insurance agents. Some of them are social workers. Some of you may know Lisa Subeck. She's one of the legislators in Madison. She was a child care worker. She worked with homeless people. She's a very regular, down-to-earth person. And I would say that's true of most of the state legislators that I've met.
Yeah, I mean, I've started contacting my state legislators and senator, and yeah, they're just down to earth people who just want to try and help out their district as best as they can.
And I'll tell you right now, I think they really need to hear from people about this crisis and how this crisis is affecting them, because they might have their own opinion of what's the right thing to do in terms of legislation or funding, but really they ought to be making the decisions on what to do based on what their constituents are feeling.
Yeah.
And if people are having problems or they think the safer at home date ought to be extended or whatever, you should let your legislators know that, because otherwise they're just going to be guessing at what you think.
Yeah, they need to hear from all of you. So it's a true statement. Thank you, Lynn.
Yeah.
So you answered all my questions very well. We did get some questions from some of our members. They're a bit more specific, but I think that
go ahead.
They're important. So the first one, we have a member who they live in Madison regularly. Their sister lives in Chicago, but she wanted to bring him down to Chicago. And he's on IRIS, and she's wondering if there is some kind of stipulation about receiving IRIS funds when you don't live in state anymore for a time being.
Yeah, I think if you leave the state for a temporary period, it should not endanger your funding in IRIS. Now, of course, if you were getting in-home supports funded by IRIS and you're now in Chicago, I'm not sure if the IRIS program is going to send anybody down to Chicago or if they're going to contract with an agency in Chicago to support you. That would be something you'd have to ask your IRIS consultant about. But I don't think that your status in the IRIS program should be endangered by that. And for other people, if you live in Madison and you're staying with relatives in some other part of Wisconsin, there you really should be able to continue your IRIS plan and find somebody in that part of the state who can provide you the supports that you need. I don't think there's much question about that. I just think Chicago, it raises a question about the practical reality of having, IRIS funded services in another state. And I really don't know about that, but your IRIS consultant should know.
Okay. We've been talking so much about IRIS, but family care is valuable to know about too, since IRIS funds are statewide, but family care changes from county to county. If you were to move to a county that didn't have family care, would you believe that would be affected as well, or would that be similar to IRIS?
I think for a temporary period, you might be able to stay with the same managed care organization, and they might figure out a way to arrange for services for you in that other county. If it was going to be for a longer period, like 6 or 9 months or more, then I think the managed care organization might actually want you to disenroll and enroll with a new managed care organization. But obviously that's a big hassle, and I'm sure people would want to avoid doing that. And if this crisis, doesn't last any more than 2 or 3 months, I think you could stay with the same managed care organization.
Okay. That's valuable to know. I have a question from one of our LOV members who he's wondering about your opinion about how long do you truly think that the Safer at Order will continue? Because right now it looks like it's going to get extended every month until they feel comfortable. But what's your belief?
I think there's a very good chance that it will get extended beyond April 24th. But I don't know if it'll be extended a full month. I think what the governor is going to do is he's going to be watching the number of people who have tested positive for the virus. He's going to be watching those numbers very closely. And if they're still going up on April 24th, he might extend it for another month. If they're starting to go down, but there's still a significant number of new cases, he may say, well, I want to extend this 2 more weeks or something like that. But if I had to guess right now, I guess that it will go beyond April 24th, but it's very hard to say how much longer it's going to go beyond that.
And then a follow-up to that would be, when do you think things could go back to actual normalcy? Because I feel like even with the order being done, I still think that people will be really skeptical. Do you think that people are going to jump right back into normal life, or do you think there's going to be a buffer period?
Okay, so let's say back to normal means if you're out of work now, you get to go back to your job the same hours you had. You'll get to go back to restaurants, libraries, coffee shops, whatever you were doing before. I think that each person is going to have to decide what is safe for them. Like, let's say the governor says, okay, on May 10th, I'm going to let restaurants open again and people don't have to stay at home all the time. I think at that point, you have to decide, well, based on my age and my medical conditions, what is safe for me? And most of you probably know that that older people like me are more at risk than people in their 20s and 30s. So if you're in your 60s, then you might have to be more careful. Also, if you have a chronic condition, in other words, you have a condition like asthma or a diabetes or cerebral palsy, something that's lasting a long time, you should really be talking to your doctor about, does that put me at higher risk for getting this virus? And even though the governor has ended the safer at home order, would it be wise for me to still stay at home maybe for another couple of weeks and make sure that it's really safe before I go back to work? And I think that's something you could talk to your family about, your doctor, your iris consultant, and really think about that before you decide, and not just think, oh, great, I heard the governor's lifting the safer at home, so great, I can go back and do everything I was doing before. That might be true for some of you, and maybe for some of you that would be a little too soon.
Yeah, it's going to be that tempting thing that once everything is lifted about everyone wanting to go back out there, but I just am getting the feeling that hopefully people are understanding that this needs to be kind of rein back in slowly rather than just jump right into the deep end.
Yep.
And then one final question. Right now, mental health is so important. So many people are stuck inside, or they're completely isolated, and it's hard to stay positive at a time like this. But what are certain ways that what are certain things you use to relieve stress throughout your day?
Well, I think personally, and I've been hearing this a lot on the radio, that any kind of exercise at all is good, and whether you liked walking or biking or yoga or stretching, whatever you like, that is good. And it's not just good for your body, it's good for your mind. So I think if there is a form of exercise that you can do, and of course do it safely, still maintaining social distance, I think that's really a good idea. If there's any sort of spiritual practice that you've engaged in the past, or that you have been engaging in recently before the stay at home, see if there's a way you can continue that. Like for my wife and me, our church, of course, is not having people come together on Sunday morning, but our pastor is leading a worship service from her apartment, and we can see it on Zoom or YouTube when it's happening, or we can see it later if we're not available on Sunday morning. But if it's meditation or mindfulness or yoga or anything like that, I think that's good stuff. And now, probably more than ever, there is stuff online and on YouTube. If you go on YouTube and you punch in, meditation, you punch in mindfulness, like a bunch of videos will pop up.
Yeah,
so
it's nice.
It's definitely stuff that you can do at home. About a week ago, I heard Richie Davidson from UW-Madison, who's a pretty famous guy. He was talking about something he called compassionate meditation. And what he means by that is, if there's somebody that you care about or that you're worried about, but you can't see them right now, face to face, well, you can think about them, and you can think about them in a positive way. Like, think about them being healthy, being happy, and you can have this way of sort of meditating about your mom or your friend, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, a coworker. You can think about them in a positive way, and that'll make you feel better, and maybe it'll make them feel better too. Who knows how that stuff works? The last thing I would say is, this crisis is not going to last that long. It seems right now like every day seems like it's going really long, but if it's 2 months or 3 months, it's still going to be this summer that maybe things will start getting back to normal. And I think start creating a positive vision in your mind of what your life is going to be like when it comes back to normal. I mean, start thinking about when you're back to work, when you can start going wherever you want, when you can start seeing your friends again, and start focusing on that, because it's not going to be that long. Hopefully it's going to be in May. If not, maybe it'll be in June, but it's coming. And I think you can embrace that vision right now and start thinking about that as the way that things will be, hopefully not that long from now.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I think we'll end there on a positive note. So thank you really very much, Lynn, for coming on. It's really appreciated. I always like hearing what you have to say. So yeah, thank you so much. Do you have one final thing to say to everybody?
No, just stay safe and be patient. We're going to get through this sooner than you think. And thanks for inviting me for the interview, Zach. I enjoyed it.
Of course. We'll talk soon, Lynn. You have a good day.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Thank you, everybody. If you have any questions, please email me. I believe that this will be on our channel. I'm still learning how stuff is saving, but my email is Zach at LOV Inc. So ZACH at LOVINC.org. If you have any additional questions, I can send them to Lynn. Otherwise, thank you so much for tuning in. Stay healthy and well, and have a good day. Bye, everybody.